And we're going to kind of start at the top level, and we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty and end up talking about the price variation, 70-30. Is it working? Is it uniform? Is it fair on both sides? We're going to talk about, how has the whole thing become very attritional in terms of government procurement that's ending in disputes and potentially litigation. But at first level, we're going to talk to the people who are at the centre of actually the paymasters and the customers of all of this. And I'm really delighted to have such a stellar group here with us. For many years, I slagged Robert Watt, and more especially, he slagged me. But now we've a civilised man doing that job. The Secretary General of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, as a former minister, I regard it as certainly one of the key jobs in government. If I was advising someone who had a project and they want to get public funding, I would send them in David's direction. Robert Watt now manages one budget, he manages about 17. And it's really important. And obviously we'll have Michael McGrath, Minister, here this afternoon, but I can't tell you how at the top of the pyramid is. Unfortunately, Anne Graham has COVID, the CEO, but we're delighted to welcome on behalf of the National Transport Authority the head of public transport investment, Eoin Gillard. And I'm also delighted to welcome one of the foremost consultants in this whole area to deal with the whole issue of environment, planning. Gus McCarthy is well known to you, long-standing, well-respected director of MKO. And joining us on the screen, I hope, is Niall Gleeson, the CEO of Irish Water, who has been with us for the last few years and actually wrote down all the comments he made at last year's conference about all the great things he was going to deliver. 6 billion is provided in the National Development Plan last time I checked for water and sanitary services and all that good stuff. So what I'm going to do here is allow each member of the panel, because they have skin in this game, to tell me the relaunch of the National Development Plan took place last October. You'll be aware there had been a change of government since it was originally launched, and because it's such a long-term project, it's appropriate it would be reviewed. Now, in fairness, it was reviewed before the Putin war situation, and that was unforeseen. And Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. O'Rourke's Law that Murphy was an optimist. But basically, I'm going to allow each of them to say, from their perspective, how they think the NDP is going, what are the challenges, and what they're doing to solve those challenges. David.
Very much, Ivan, and thanks very much for the invite to the conference. It's great to be here. It's great to hear what people have to say. For myself, I suppose, as Ivan said, it's a €165 billion National Development Plan. It represents, I think, a huge upscale in ambition in terms of the infrastructure investment the country needs, in terms of economic and social and green ambition. And, in its first couple of years, I suppose, there's no doubt about it, a number of challenges. So what we see is a number of underspends. But I think we need to bear in mind the scale of the ambition that it represents, the scale of the transformation of our infrastructure that it represents. So for example, if we think about retrofitting, we're creating a whole new retrofitting industry. We're putting in place the further education and training. I'm sure Minister Harris spoke to that this morning. We're putting in place the skills development. We're putting in place a whole new industry of retrofit. At the same time, as Ivan has said, a number of challenges in terms of the external environment that we didn't predict this time last year. But there's also clearly a really big pipeline of projects right across the areas in which you're interested, I would say. In some places, we've had huge success. So if we look at the education sector over the last year, what we see is the education sector, a sector where a very strong model has been developed over time and rolled out, very strong delivery focus, and that's resulted in quite a lot of success even within the challenges of the last year in terms of getting things built and getting things done. And I suppose from my perspective, it's about, in some ways, trying to replicate that success right across the construction area. We recognise our part in that. I chair the the Project Ireland Delivery Board. I chair the Construction Sector Group. We do try and listen to what people have to say. We know that from our side of the table, a lot of what we do in terms of the public spending code and other regulatory requirements that we impose for value for money and regularity and accountability purposes can sometimes be seen as adding layers and causing delay into projects. And we're prepared to address those issues with you. We're constantly reviewing the public spending code. There's a group of Secretaries General at the moment, which I chair, looking at it, seeing if we can, make it speedier, seeing if we can, look at the thresholds that are involved. But there are challenges. We won't rehearse exactly what the challenges are. We can all list the projects. But we always bear in mind, and in fora like this, we always say, and in the Oireachtas we always say that, yes, we know about the big projects that have been really challenging, but most capital projects have the history of getting delivered pretty much on budget and pretty much on time. And that's what we want to replicate. And so not at all denying that in the current circumstances, especially with the inflation of the Ukraine war this year, that there are huge challenges. I hope there's a sense in the room that we're prepared to work with you on those challenges. We've introduced, Minister McGrath has introduced the Inflation Cooperation Framework. Happy to talk about that. I know there's a session later in relation to general public procurement, and there's a lot to speak about there. But look, just by way of introductory remarks, Ivan, if that's...
And why do you think there's a consistent underspend of about 1.7 billion annually? And secondly, from your perspective, speaking to this audience, in the context of value for money, do you think the Irish construction industry, with international comparisons, could be more productive, efficient, cost-effective?
So I suppose, when we think about the underspend, and we're very aware of the scale of the underspend over the last couple of years, but if we go back 3 or 4 years, that underspend wasn't there. So we have a few things coming together. We have a hugely increased scale of ambition, and that challenges us all. It challenges us at government in terms of the procedures that we apply. I'm sure it also challenges the industry. I heard a speaker in the earlier session talk about the need to modernise, the need to become a higher productivity industry. I think she was talking about the residential sector in particular. But of course, we're working together on that in terms of Build Digital, in terms of modern methods of construction, in terms of trying to modernise how we all do our practice. And I think that's a challenge to the industry, certainly, but it's a shared challenge with government.
Okay, and you're going to fix the underspend, are you?
Well, I think what we will see is that as the scale of the industries build up, what we will see is that underspend, we will catch up on it. Hopefully we will be moving into, it's difficult to know, but over the next couple of years, we'd hope to move into a more stable environment, politically and in terms of inflation and so on. But economic headwinds can come as well, so there will be challenges. But we're at a startup phase, and I think we will catch up.
Okay. Owen, maybe you could just outline sort of your greatest hits of the National Development Plan for transport. I'm thinking DART Plus, I'm thinking Lewis, I'm thinking Metrolink, I'm thinking bus corridors. Just tell us how it's going, what the sort of top line shape of it looks like.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to say that the National Planning Framework and the National Development Plan under Project Ireland 2040 were game changers in terms of the delivery of major public transport infrastructure and transport infrastructure in general, because the average sort of life cycle of a project from early planning through to someone cutting a ribbon at the end of it is somewhere between 10 and 15 years. So when you were previously working on annual budget cycles and not knowing whether you were going to get funding into the future, it made it very, very difficult to create the confidence and develop the pipeline that now exists within the National Development Plan. So having that sort of 10-year envelope of funding is critical for these large infrastructure projects and giving confidence to the sector that there is actually the will to deliver them and the funding behind that. So the National Development Plan then has set out those strategic outcomes and identified the transport infrastructure that's necessary to deliver on those strategic outcomes. So it's given a strong planning context for the projects. As you mentioned there, we have DART Plus, which is moving from 50 kilometres of electrified DART services to 150 kilometres, going out as far as Drogheda, Maynooth, Hazel Hatch and Selbridge and down to Greystones. Similarly, Metrolink, we're now seeing that coming of age again, a railway order just lodged on it. But that's critical to the delivery of the ambition of Fingal and that corridor all the way in along the Belfast Economic Corridor as well, which really suffers from issues. And then we have the Bus Connects programme, which really is revolutionising the bus network. But that's not just in Dublin, it's in Cork, it's in Galway, it's in Limerick, it's in Waterford, and there are also rail projects in Cork, Limerick, Galway and Waterford. The thing that the review of the National Development Plan also did was it enshrined then a commitment to active travel projects. So it's not just about mega projects and it's just about these really large infrastructure projects, but across the 31 local authorities, 365 million a year on active travel projects, which are smaller scale, road reallocation or cycleway and footpath projects. Looking at how well is it going, I suppose it was a game changer, but for these major infrastructure projects, we were at a standing start. The financial crisis in 2008, the funding stream was cut off. The funding stream for planning and development of these projects was cut off. So projects there was no shovel-ready projects in the pipeline. So the pipeline was starting right at the source. So what we have seen in the years between 2016 to now is trying to get those projects through the early planning stages, public consultation, public buy-in, getting them then through the public spending code approval processes and demonstrating that value for money, and then to get them to the point of actually lodging them into the planning system. So I know we're going to talk a lot today about the procurement processes. We're not at the procurement processes because we're still in planning, because those projects take a long time to get to that procurement process. So was there optimism in the National Development Plan and the timelines it would take to get through that process? There was optimism. When we go out to the public with the plans for Bus Connects and it's impacting gardens and it's impacting every stakeholder, then we have to go and revisit the plans, and it takes us a longer time to get to that point. So that's one of the reasons for those underspends, is that people thought we would be getting to implementation quicker. The review of the National Development Plan has obviously revisited those timelines and reprofiled the expenditure. So the commitment to the projects is still there, the funding for them is still there, but it's recognising that the DART Plus West implementation might not start until 2025.
You don't think there's a credibility issue with some of these?
No, I don't think there is a credibility issue.
They've been postponed so many times, Metrolink, that, will it be in our lifetime?
Yeah, well, look,
I'm 62. I mean, it's a look at that.
Yeah, well, look, you haven't been working on it for 20 years. It can be quite demoralising. But personally, I'm from North Dublin myself. Not constructing the Metrolink when it had planning permission and was just about to go into a financial close on the procurement of it was a mistake. And we're paying for those mistakes now. So we didn't lose it for a generation. We probably lost it for 2 generations. And now, the price that's been put against it is probably 3 or 4 times what the original price was. But it needs to be delivered, and there is a definite commitment that it will be delivered within the National Development Plan.
Okay, I'm going to stick with the public sector. Niall, I'll bring you in here. Obviously, when we talk about residential or other development being shovel-ready, one of the key aspects beyond planning is, of course, the sanitary services, the water, wastewater treatment. You have a very specific plan and number of projects. How's it going?
Good, yeah. I think we're on track to deliver 1.1 billion this year, which was our budget. Overall, as you said, we have 6 billion between now and 2025, and towards to the end of the decade, we'll deliver another 5 to 6 billion on infrastructure projects. And look, the NDP can't go ahead without our major infrastructure projects catching up. But as Gus said, getting projects shovel ready and getting them, if we hit a roadblock, say with one project in planning or whatever, then having something else to back that up that's not easy. So, getting all those projects shovel ready and getting the timelines correct. Look, there are processes there. My biggest bugbear would be on the planning and judicial review processes. Public spending codes say, I think gives good discipline. I think we're following those codes. We have some public sector guidelines or sectoral guidelines that we can work with, and the department has shown good flexibility around that. And I think what it does is it helps us to define projects, the real cost of projects up front. There used to be a bit of an attitude in Ireland: don't tell anyone the real price, you'll never get permission to build it. Now we've moved away from that, and we're seeing the real prices coming through. But to give you an example, go back to planning, the Greater Dublin Drainage Project, which we will need in Dublin towards the end of this decade to allow growth or continued growth. We went for original planning in 2018. We got planning permission in 2019. It went for judicial review. That took about 18 months, back with Bord Pleanála for another 12 to 18 months. Now we realize now we may have to do some more studies to go for another application. We don't think we'll get planning till about 25, 26. That's 7 or 8 years to get a project through planning. That we can't do the NDP or deliver the NDP if that planning process continues. So that will be my biggest concern around the NDP at the moment. But I think we are delivering, Irish Water is delivering as best we can under the circumstances. But as Gus was saying, we are building much longer timelines into our projects now. We're saying 5 to 7 years, even on relatively minor projects for delivery. That includes planning, judicial review, that kind of thing. We should be saying 2 to 3 years.
And does that mean that the planning and regulatory process is actually not fit for purpose?
I think everyone, people talk about raising the bar for access to complaints and or to challenge and that. I don't think that's going to work, but I do think we could go faster. The timelines are too long in how long it takes to do, say, a planning process. And I'm not being critical about with colleagues in Bord Pleanála and that. I think we just need to put more resources at this. We need to, and again, on the judicial side, judiciary side, the legal side.
Even the government says Bord Pleanála needs radical reform.
Yeah, look, I certainly think they need more resources. They need to be able to look at multiple projects. The NDP is a massive challenge for them and for the country. So we're going to have to take a different view to how we do things. Certainly, I think resourcing is going to be one of the biggest challenges, to get more projects through and get more issues resolved. But it's not just on Bord Pleanála. There is a good planning system there. The judicial review process needs to be looked at as well. I think we need to speed that up and get through those issues more quickly.
And this big project, the million growth in population, focused on the East Coast, focused on the Greater Dublin area, and bringing the water from the Shannon. Did I hear that had been long finished?
No, well, look, again, planning that we've got a planning process to go through, which we'll be applying for planning permission in around 2024. But we also have new abstraction legislation, which could drive that project out later if we don't manage that new legislation carefully and put in a process that makes sense. Right now, we are looking at delays to that project, but actually the timeline that we're working to is tight. But we need, I think, on some of these more critical projects, we need the government to maybe have a status where these projects get to the top of the queue, get very fixed timelines, get addressed by specialized teams. Because again, we need some of these very critical projects to work their way through the system to allow us to deliver according to the NPP.
Gus McCarthy, I'm 4 decades at this stuff, and I know public officials are systemically, culturally saying nothing, see here, everything's going wonderfully, it's fantastic, all that good stuff. How do you see it as a planning consultant with 40 years of experience? Finance doesn't seem to be an impediment, which it was in yesteryear. Why is the traction and delivery so slow?
Yeah, I suppose we work across virtually all sectors, from housing to commercial to renewable energy, and so we have experience of the delays in the delivery of projects, and we're a support to the industry, to the people that are here today. If we can't get do our part, then everybody else is held up. We have a national development plan which is very ambitious. It's very comprehensive. There are, I think, approximately 176 projects listed in the project tracker. For the first time, it's aligned with the National Planning Framework, which is something that needed to be done. The challenge is delivery. I was part of a forum feeding into the review of the National Development Plan on behalf of the CIF. There was a forum for the entire country, one for the Midlands, West, Northwest region, where we spoke with all of the parties that are involved in the delivery of infrastructure. And the level of frustration among everybody from local authorities to other organisations in those meetings in terms of the challenges of delivery, planning challenges, resource challenges. So we do have significant challenges. We saw an element of this some time ago, in the previous, I suppose, boom, when it took quite a long time for the ramping up of resources, particularly in the qualified areas where you need qualified people, planning, environmental, and so on. We now have a serious shortfall in those areas once again in terms of the numbers, the availability of qualified people to deal with a much more complex environment in terms of legislation and so on. And unfortunately, during the previous boom, it was over before the education system ramped up to the higher numbers. And we're potentially going to repeat that once again. We do have a serious shortfall at the moment of qualified people in those areas.
Is there a quick fix on that?
Well,
talking to secondary school students, like Simon Harris said this morning, is well and good, but it's going to take time.
It's going to take time, and I mean, we're going into the universities now.
Can we import some of these?
We are importing people.
Because that's what the tech industry have done.
Yes, but it's difficult if you're importing people from outside the EU. It's
in the UK they have a national tracking commission, and the last to call for yet another quango in our thousands of quangos. But is the tracking system effective in terms of projects? Because we have a very familiar thing: set piece, government building, big announcement, billions, big announcement of projects, and then they re-announce it all over again. I mean, where is the tracking and delivery? What's the best oversight of that that's possible?
There is a project tracker. The last update of that tracker was in May of this year. So that would suggest that there's been no activity since May. I don't expect that it would be updated every day. But given that this is the biggest single investment programme in the history of the state, we do need a project tracker that is relevant and that is up to date and that is updated on a regular basis. And within that, we have the list of 175 odd projects, but you need a detailed tracker for each individual project in the same way as you would have for a project that was going to construction. So a lot of the entries for projects are quite vague in terms of where the project is at. So we do need a more relevant, more up-to-date project tracker. But in my view, we need not necessarily a quango, but we need some body or entity that has overall responsibility for the delivery of the National Development Plan. And that has the ability, because there's a multitude of agencies involved.
David, whose job is that today?
Well, I chair with Graham Doyle's South Gen and Housing a Project Ireland Delivery Board, and that has around the table the Secretaries General of all the major capital departments. So we meet regularly to look at and review progress in relation to the capital projects. We do have, there's no doubt about it, a very decentralised system in terms of, we have a lot of sectoral agencies and departments who make decisions about the priorities within their areas. So we don't attempt to centralise that here. And I'm not entirely sure that the UK arrangement works to centralise it either. So different departments have their budgets, they determine priorities in relation to the sector, and they drive out from there. The project tracker, fair enough, it is quite a high-level project tracker, except that it's a very complex undertaking, and we've been talking in the context of the construction sector group and other places trying to improve that, because throughout the whole National Development Plan, our idea really is to give people a line of sight. That's the advantage of the 10-year plan. And yeah, a lot of the things that we're talking about there, the building up of resources on Onboard Planola, the planning system as a whole, there's been quite a lot of planning legislation over the last 12 to 18 months. And there is, as you probably know, a major project undertaken by the Attorney General's office in relation to planning, and we expect to see that come to fruition in the coming weeks. And so we have a lot of long-term issues that need to be addressed. We do accept that, and we constantly talk to the interested parties about that. We constantly make changes to try and move along and improve our processes. And we do that as a collective. So we do that so that the whole system gets the messages across the Project Ireland Delivery Board and in other places. So we have an infrastructure to give us an oversight. But there are huge challenges in the current system, and it is to do with the upscaling, and it is to do with the availability of resources in terms of people and skills.
Okay, I'll throw this open now. First of all, you're very quiet and sleepy on the Slido. I have nothing. If someone wants to put up a hand, we do have a roving microphone. But I just want to ask you about the most imminent and pressing issue for everyone in this room, which is they may have submitted and successfully won a tender at a price over a project that was going to last a few years. And maybe 2019, 2020, in which COVID was unforeseen, the disruption to the supply chain and the impact on spiking prices, the energy war, the Ukraine situation. Now, last year's conference, this was a very hot political topic, and Michael McGrath said he would go away and come back with something. And what he came back with was this 70-30 arrangement. To my horror, I find it is a la carte. People, you spoke about a disparate decentralized system. A local authority or a transport body or a HSE can say, no, not going to listen to you on that. What is the government doing, or what is the fairest solution? Because that does involve a verification process of extra cost as opposed to just an add-on. So in transport, has this arisen that you've had to look at this? In water, has it arisen? And what's the fairest and most effective uniform solution? Eoin.
It certainly has arisen, and obviously the application of the price variation clauses, I suppose there's three different categories. There's one where it's from the point of tender to the point of award, and then there's the one that's actually projects in train as well. And then obviously there's what the current trend in tendering is going like. But the application of the price variation, it's not simple. That's the first thing, and I suppose the people who are applying it aren't familiar with it.
That's what they pay the big bucks for.
Well, that is what they pay the big bucks for, but they also pay us to keep spending under certain limits and under control as well. So that accountability, I suppose, is there for people. The application of it is complex. It only applies to certain materials. It only applies to certain things, and it is difficult for, I suppose, the contractors to put in a credible submission, and then someone to review that as well. So I do think it is complex. I have seen, though, that there's a willingness to work with people and achieve sort of fair outcomes for everyone. There is an underspend, so when there's an underspend and you have an annual allocation, sometimes you can have the opportunity to be fair and reasonable with that.
Niall, is this a problem in the water area? Price variation?
I think it's obviously, I think it's a problem for everybody. I mean, this is inflation that we haven't seen in decades. You know, we're used to 1.5%, and it was never a big issue in contract finalization. So, and look, I'm originally from the private sector, so I know most of these suppliers and contractors are working off margins, if they're good, of 3 to 5%. So they can't. I think we have to understand they can't absorb these costs. And when we talk about resources and, you know, getting extra staff and consultants, whatever it is, we need the supply chain to be able to look at the work for the next 10 years and make investments. We've got some of the best suppliers now on directional tunneling, for example, but they've made that investment because they can see the long-term value in investing in that equipment. But if they're not making money, they're going to do other things. They're going to do less complex stuff, So we've got to be sympathetic to that. I think we do have the 70-30 split is reasonable at the moment. We're working on that basis, but I think we also have a little, we have to be allowed to have a little bit of flexibility and understand that some contracts are different. But at the end of the day, if our supply chain isn't making money on this, they're not going to be interested.
Specifically, you said you're 1.1 billion for 22. What's your spend in Irish Water for 23?
We'll be up at about 1.3 billion.
Okay. And NTA? 1 billion. Because I had 365, it's gone up.
365 for active travel.
Oh, I see.
But public transport on top of that. It's about.
Gus, in your opinion, it's a two-way street, and collaborative solutions are probably the only solution for these external price shocks. How fair do you think the system is, and how uniform is it?
And I think the scale of inflation, cost inflation recently has caught everybody by surprise. And unless something is done to assist the people who are delivering these are carrying out these projects, then we're going to have a further difficulty in for those projects that have gone to construction. We're going to have a further difficulty in terms of delivering on the National Development Plan.
And in your opinion, is there any particular subsector that's more fraught with trouble in this area? We're going to speak later to the DAA, and they actually do their own thing independently. I'm hearing a situation whereby a lot of the huge contractors now are looking to get export work. They're not interested in public sector work because of this inflexibility. Do you think that's where, someone said to me out there, Ivan, if you continue to look into the abyss, you will become the abyss. So, I'm trying to be fair here. What is fair?
Well, I suppose the contracting side isn't my area of expertise, but from being in the sector, I do know that contractors are very, very nervous at the moment, and the prices that are tender prices are holding for a very, very short period of time because of inflation.
The life scale of them.
Yes, yeah. And ultimately contractors they won't continue unless there is a remedy for this. They'll have to find an alternative like tendering for work abroad.
So you've heard all the problems, David. What's first of all your attitude to fair play, or is it a try on? And secondly, you could win a battle and lose the war in terms of people said, look, if I'm going to lose money in a public sector contract, I'm just not going to put my neck in that noose.
Yeah, you look at the history of it, and originally we introduced the fixed price public works arrangement because there was a lot of controversy about overspends, overruns, all of that sort of stuff, more than a decade ago now. After a long period of stable price inflation, as we know, we've hit more recent times. Inflation has become a huge issue again, the way it hasn't been for 40 years. And I think we've responded to that in some ways. We do listen to the concerns. We see the tenders coming in, the contracting authorities see the level of interest, and we respond to that in terms of the inflation cooperation framework and in terms of earlier initiatives this year. Over the longer term, I suppose in the next session we'll probably cover it in more detail than we can here. But over the longer term, we're willing to look at the overall public works contract, and we're willing to look at what changes are necessary and appropriate to ensure that we have a continued supply of construction services so that we can deliver the NDP. And I think broadly, we haven't taken in at any stage a very irredentist kind of attitude to all of this. We've listened to what people said, we've responded at different times, and we continue to do that.
I'm not an expert in this area, but people tell me the NEC model in the UK is more collaborative in terms of, the GAA speak very strongly because they have massive projects. We're going to speak to them later, but in terms of runways and things like that, that they find that the NEC system allows more flexibility as the project emerges. Is that something you'd look at?
Well, I think the next session will look at that. Certainly we already have in the inflation cooperation framework not a one-size-fits-all, but an opportunity to open a discussion around individual contracts. So I think we have signalled that we are open to that kind of flexibility and collaboration in the changed circumstances that we face, and we just have to work out what that means in terms of the future public works contract.
Okay, we're running out of time, but there's 2 questions here, and anyone can take them. If critical infrastructure utilities are not prioritised in the Irish economy, it will suffer for centuries to come, as key FDI opportunities will go elsewhere. Do the panel feel the urgency, and what has happened to mitigate this risk? And what is the first NDP scheme to hit the ground for Irish Water and the NTA? When will construction tender documents land for these? So a general question, maybe Eoin and Niall. The first NDP scheme to hit the ground, has that already happened? Niall?
For ourselves, yeah, look, we've delivered the Vartry project, we've delivered Lee Road down in Cork, Cork Lower Harbour. All of these are in the NDP, and all of those are moving well. As soon as we get boots on the ground, we deliver, and we deliver pretty much on budget and on schedule. Again, it's the pre-planning processes that, or pre-construction processes that are slowing us down, I would say. But yeah, we are moving on. But I would like to be issuing tenders for the Greater Dublin Drainage Project next year, and I'm not able to. So we do have challenges, and I think that the point there of maybe creating a list of strategic projects that somehow within all the various agencies that do approvals, Bord Pleanála, EPA, whoever it might be, that they get prioritised. I think that is something we should look at, and it should be achievable, I would think.
NTA imminent?
Yeah, look, there's projects on site at the moment, the Clontarf City Centre Cycle Scheme, there's depot electrification projects, and some of those projects are using NEC forms of contract and FIDIC forms of contract as well, and that's born out of consultations that are being had with the market. In parallel with the projects being in planning now across Bus Connects and DART, the procurement processes are being developed in parallel. So market consultations are happening. There's ongoing market consultations on the PPP projects. I think probably the first ones we'll see going out to tender are the Bus Connects core bus corridors, and that's probably going to be sometime in the middle of next year. And I think as well then there is a whole plethora, it's not all tier 1 projects. There's tier 2, there's tier 3 projects, there's active travel projects being tendered the whole time. They might not be the headline makers, but they're there and they're critical to delivering on the NDP and the ambitions.
We didn't mention sustainability, and every conference I go to is about decarbonisation as well as biodiversity. Is this impacting on the development of the built environment?
Absolutely, and obviously, as I was saying earlier, the requirements that projects have to go through now in getting the consent, the requirements, particularly planning and environmental, are enormous. They're time consuming, they require a lot of resources, and they're not going to go away. We will have to continue to go through those. So I think
it's a fact of life, really. It's EU-led as well.
It's EU-led, absolutely. So I think we need absolute clarity, and we need stability, which in turn will give rise to, increasing the capacity of the industry to be able to deliver. But unless we have that clarity and we have the stability, which was mentioned by the earlier panel, we're going to have these up and down cycles, and we're not going to have the capacity to deliver the National Development Plan at the pace that we would like to, and particularly given that when funding isn't the main issue. In the past it would have been. It doesn't appear to be now for the moment.
Okay. Does deeper do urgent?
We do, yeah. I mean, the question is well put, but I mean the government is very, very keenly aware that the delivery of the NDP and the infrastructure is essential, not just for the economic, but also for its social and climate goals. I mean, the NDP is the funding envelope for the Climate Action Plan and for our carbon ambitions as well. So, absolutely, it's a long-term plan. It's there to give a long-term pipeline that people can plan and prepare around, we can develop the workforce for. But within that, yeah, there's a sense of urgency. And I think this year we have responded with a sense of urgency to some of the challenges. I think some of the challenges are very difficult, complex challenges that we just have to work together and overcome. but there is absolutely a sense of urgency throughout government in relation to
Okay,
this.
well, the people in this room depend on all your efforts to drive these projects forward. I'd like to thank you most sincerely online, Niall Gleeson of Irish Water, Gus McCarthy of MKO, Eoin Gillard of Transport, DNTA, and David Moloney, Secretary General of DEPA. Please show your appreciation.